Every lab that we've ever worked in has a certain specific set of rules. Wear your lab coat, wear your goggles, no horseplay, and of course, no eating or drinking in the lab. That's unfortunate since there are certain things that look absolutely delicious and most people will only ever encounter in a lab. That's why I'm here in my not a lab where we purchase and build our own lab supplies for the sole purpose of eating them and teaching you a few things along the way. Welcome back. I'm Matt, and this is the Hungry Microbiologist. Today, we're working with our first liquid media. What we have here is LB Broth. This is the same makeup as the LB Auger that we did back in our first video. Yeast, salt, tryptone, water, and in this case, no gelatinizing agent, so it simply stays as a liquid. The reason you would want something like this is for growing a large amount of bacteria. When we're growing on a solid media, we only have the surface area to work with. When we're growing in a liquid, we can take advantage of the entire volume of the media. Before, I used to talk a lot about selecting a specific colony or being able to look at a colony and pick it out on a plate. Once you've picked out that colony and it's rapidly dividing, remember you've got that exponential growth. In the literal sense, it is 2 to the power of x is your growth rate. You can grow a lot of that targeted colony of bacteria and get a lot of clones and a lot of identical copies of the bacteria you wanted very quickly. So to take full advantage, if you grow them in a media like this, you can get far more than just a little colony would give you. Downsides are we needed some specialized equipment. First, we needed an incubator that will continually agitate the media. Before, we've simply been setting them on a heated bed and letting that media grow, and that was just fine. Bacteria are small, but not small that they'll dissolve in a liquid or anything like that. We have to keep it constantly agitated or else they'll simply settle out and form a pellet at the bottom. That's something that we can take advantage of in other experiments, but while we're growing them, we need them to stay suspended. So we've built one of those. Also, looking at how the media is changing, we can tell that there are bacteria growing. Not specific colonies, but we can see the cloudiness increase. But to exactly know how many bacteria we have, it's not like we can get a count of colonies. We could perform dilution down, plate it, and then count the CFUs. But that would take a day for the colonies to grow and be countable, so now we've got 24 hours more of growth. It's not practical. So what we've done is we've built a spectrometer that we'll be using later on to test the OD600. That is the optical density at 600 nanometers. And that is exactly like I say with our eyes, how we look at how cloudy the media is. That gives us a quantified number for that. And maybe not an exact number of bacteria per milliliter or number of colony-forming units. Nothing like that, but a good idea of where in the growth stage we are, and a repeatable enough measurement that for specific experiments that require induction or changing of media at a specific point, you can determine by your OD600 if you're at that point. So, here's what we have. A couple of little test tubes here. I'll be growing the bacteria in these two. I've already mucked them up so they're not quite sterile, along with bringing along a little bit of known non-sterile water. This one, however, I'm going to try and keep as sterile as possible. When I purchased these tubes from Amazon, this one was labeled, or they all were. This one is still left in the state where they said it was ethyloxylene sterilized. I don't know how effective that is, so I want to run a control tube just for my purposes to see. So, if this were a real lab, I would run everything through an autoclave before I used it. No point in running any risks at that point. An autoclave is pretty standard. But that is definitely something that I do not have, and the pressures involved in an autoclave are probably beyond my ability to build with simple equipment. Yes, if I bought a pressure cooker or something, maybe we could go for it, but that's all for another time. The other problem here is that this came in a plastic bottle. Normally, I would be flame sterilizing the edges as I poured. Pouring this from some kind of a glass flask. It's simply not possible with plastic. I would certainly melt it and certainly just destroy my whole bottle. So we might not get more than one experiment out of this. That's perfectly fine. This is what I purchased it for. But just so you know, my sterile technique here might not be perfect. The trouble with trying to keep anything sterile is simply, even air isn't sterile. We are absolutely screwed when it comes to trying to keep bacteria from growing. All the weird techniques I show you to make it grow, and the truth is making it not grow is honestly far more complicated. Tap on that. And that'll simply go back on my shelf. The way I'll know it's not sterile is if things start to grow in it. It's bacterial media. So that will be the sign that it's become contaminated. This here is just a little bit of water that I did not get from a sterile source. Just make sure we get a good little amount of bacteria in there to start growing. Now let's get that incubator set up. All right, so there it is. There's the new shaking incubator running, keeping those tubes agitated. Now you may be asking yourself right now, so why does this person, who so far as we can tell is an absolute genius engineer posing as an incompetent microbiologist, not made any casings for his electronic components? Well, the simple fact of the matter is that I have to consider all of these reusable. The not a lab is also not a funded. So we have our Arduino sitting right next to our prototyping board still. This is not even a prototype, it's a one-off. It's never going to make it out of this stage. That's controlling the heat regulation, keeping everything under there at 40 degrees Celsius. It is running off a 9-volt power supply, but that MOSFET is allowing it to channel that 20-volt power supply over there, stepping down to a 12-volt to run both the motor and our heater. And underneath all that, we have our 3 samples, agitating and heating. I'm going to give them about 24 hours, and I'll be back with you all when we have something growing. All right, everybody, so here we are the next morning. And I've already given these a quick little look-see, but I gave them a couple more hours. So let's just see how much growth we've got going on. Turn all my equipment off to save some of these batteries. There are nice little vials out here. Oh yeah, that looks good. They've already increased so much more over the last couple hours. You can see here's our 1 sterile tube that we kept, compared to our 2 experimental tubes that I just filled with stuff I knew wasn't sterile. We have some really good growth going on. Let's get that tested. All right, we've got our spectrometer set up so we can start testing the OD600. If you're interested in the spectrometer and the theory behind spectrometry and how I built this, go ahead and watch the last episode of Getting Hungry. But as I explained in that episode, we're not actually using the theory behind spectroscopy. We're simply using this device to see how cloudy our mixtures are. It's well calibrated and well designed, so we can get a very repeatable number from that. And that means that we can have a rough idea of maybe not a number of bacteria growing in solution, but a relative concentration and where they are in their growth cycle. Repeatably enough that we can work with experiments that require induction or growth to a specific concentration that we will express in an OD600. So with the spectrometer, first thing we need to do is get a blank. I am using a bit of the LB media from before. Just a nice simple, since that's what the bacteria is growing in. That is not always considered entirely necessary. A lot of people will test in distilled water. Remember, we set an orange filter in here for 600 nanometers. That's supposed to be relatively close to the color that is being transmitted through the media. Plug that in, we get our blank. I'm going to test it real quick. Yep, that reads right at 0. So, blank is good. On to the first experiment. First, I want to test the solution that should have stayed sterile. All that I placed into this was some of our media. I don't necessarily trust that the company provided us with sterile media. Some of the caps were open, and I just am not a trustworthy person. So let's see if this is markedly any cloudier than just plain media. Place it in. 0.001. That is as good as we're going to get, as close to 0 as we're going to get on 2 samples that aren't the exact same sample. I am impressed. This stuff stayed sterile. These tubes were apparently well made enough that the ones that didn't bust open in the bag, at least, are good to go. So what about the stuff where we know bacteria is growing? A, we can see the increase in cloudiness. And B, I made those tubes intentionally non-sterile. I had things like tap water just to get them going. Also the smell. I do not know what we grew. As you guys are probably well aware, I simply take random samples and grow them. Since we are not working on a specific experiment, we're simply demonstrating techniques. If I was a student and my lab ran whatever this is that I have here grown today by accident, I would lose my mind. That is a terrible growing smell. And we test. 0.016, 0.017. That is very low. These OD600s are not very great at all. But it is confirming that we have growth, and we would now know to continue on forward with the experiment. Let's test the other one. Zero 0.020, 0.018, 0.019. All right, it's grown to about the same amount, which we expect. I used similar samples, similar media, and let them grow for the same amount of time. So it looks like we're doing good. I'm actually going to put them back and let them grow a little more just so I can demonstrate to you all the change and how we would get our experiment to the target we want. Ready, and we're back. I'm just going to re-blank this while I talk for a second. So the first time that I took all those measurements just a second ago for y'all, I had let everything grow overnight. Probably about a whole day's worth of growth was in those tubes. And we got our OD600 of 0.02-ish. Now this time, I've only let them go for a couple of hours. There was maybe enough time for me to go order a pizza, eat lunch. So, how much growth do we expect there to have been in that time? Well, if things went properly, our bacteria should be growing, as I've mentioned, exponentially, 2 to the power of x growth rate, x being the number of generations. I don't know how long a generation is, since I don't know what bacteria we are growing. But let's see if we can demonstrate just how much more growth we get later on in a project versus at the beginning. All right, 0.023. That is disappointing. That's roughly in line with a linear growth. Try the other tube. They were growing at about the same rate before, but one data point is often insignificant. No, 0.021. All right, so we only got roughly linear looking growth. 0.02, a little less than that in 20 hours, 2 more hours, and we only got up to 0.023. I'm okay with that. I hope you guys understand that I'm growing these things under less than optimal conditions. Working with E. coli in the lab with a doubling time of 20 minutes, that could have been a lot more impressive. But now that you've seen how to measure continual growth, or growth and then continued growth with our OD600, it's time for the thing that makes these videos actually interesting. It is time for the Hungry Microbiologist Taste Test. So, as we've done before, we have tested LB Auger once. We were impressed by just how much it tasted like nothing but salt. I expected some of the yeast to get through, and in my mind, I always imagined this tasting a little bit like a beer with all the yeast growing on it. Anyway, now that we know it's nothing but salt, I am honestly horrified to drink this. Bottoms up. And it's still exactly the same. I might as well just take in a swig of ocean water. LB Auger is definitely absolutely disgusting. But I think things may only get worse from here. Next time, I've already got new bacterial media ordered. We're going to be going back to auger plates. And since I keep telling you all I'm growing these general bacteria and I don't know what I'm growing, I figured we'd get into something that does let us know. Get some selective and some indicator media going. see how those taste, because they're going to have some definite unique colors and chemical properties that just make you want to take a bite. Anyway, thank you all for coming. I've been the Hungry Microbiologist, and until next time, stay hungry.